In the fast-moving world of AI, we're seeing both rapid progress and lingering hesitation when it comes to enterprise adoption. On the one hand, the technical community is pushing the boundaries of what's possible with powerful AI models and applications, and businesses are eager to take advantage of that potential and want to move quickly to capitalize. But on the other hand, many businesses and their IT teams are still struggling to take that crucial first step, and in many cases, dealing with data estates in disarray or legacy infrastructure, or both. Why the disconnect? It all comes down to balancing the need for speed with the fear of risk. The solution? Start small, focus on quick wins, and let the data be your guide. That's according to two guests we have today on the AI Proving Ground podcast, Mike Trojecki and Poecher. Both are WWT AI experts intimately involved with how real-world organizations are positioning their businesses to leverage the power of AI. Mike and Ina represent the bridge between the technical and the practical, and craft AI solutions that make a real difference. It's a rare and invaluable skill set, one that's essential for navigating the AI revolution. This is the AI Proving Ground podcast from the Worldwide Technology. Everything AI, all in one place. I'm your host, Brian Felt, and I'm excited about this episode in which I learned a valuable lesson: never make assumptions when it comes to AI. Let's get started. Okay, Mike, kick us off with your joke. What do you got?
Are we ready to go?
Yeah, we're ready.
All right, awesome. So, Ina, great data science joke for you. Actually, I've got two of them. So, what do you get when you cross a pirate with a data scientist?
Somebody that's good at arguments.
Somebody who specializes in R.
Dang it! I was kind of close on that one.
Here's another one. Why should you always take a data scientist in the jungle with you?
That one I have no clue.
They can take care of Python problems.
That's good.
Data science humor right off the bat.
You're in the right crowd.
Like dad jokes almost is where the level of corny that hit.
I have a dad, so yes, I've got dad data science jokes that I found online. Absolutely.
Well, now that we're in the mood to be talking about data science and use cases here with AI, I'm interested in the fact that the two of you are fairly deep into client conversations around what you're seeing and what they're trying to accomplish with AI. Given that insight, what's surprising you about the state of AI within enterprise these days, Mike?
I will tell you the challenge and the surprise that I have is that people are still not adopting AI fast enough across an enterprise. Mostly it's still us technical people who are spending a lot of time in that AI world. So we're not seeing people actually adopt it in their day-to-day in a lot of cases. And I think that's something that will change as data gets out there, data models are more prevalent, and we start to understand how we can use this data. One of the things that I'm seeing in a lot of these customer conversations is everybody wants to be in this AI world, but they're not sure how to move forward. And that's one of the things that I think is why we've been so successful, is being able to help them figure out how to use it, how to use the data, right? So that's from my perspective in these customer conversations.
Yeah, and anything to add there, or just things that surprise you and how people are approaching?
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, it feels like from the technical side, we're moving so fast. And then the hesitancy on the customer side to adopt, you almost feel like the hesitancy is there because they see how fast things are moving, and making that commitment is really tricky. So just kind of seeing the opposite ends of the world there has been very surprising, and a little telling of what work needs to go into the customer side and how we can get them to adopt this new technology.
Yeah. Well, Mike, I'll push back a little bit there because it's interesting that both of you talked about the speed of AI adoption, or lack thereof, as you mentioned. We had a client who was speaking to us and said, he recognized the need to move fast. He's been, told by his board, his executive teams, that he has to move fast. Told by WWT, you have to start, you have to move fast. But there are still so many, at least in his head, risks, challenges, so to speak, that if he were to get any of it wrong, he would be potentially stopping his AI journey for, he said, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So how do our clients actually tackle, being in that between a rock and a hard space, the need to move fast, but balancing risk or, just doing it safely?
Yeah, starting small, right? Finding that use case is going to make the biggest impact. I think that is kind of the key here, right? So there's risks inherent in everything you do. So whether it's AI or whether it's security or whether it's your infrastructure or data, there's always going to be risks. If you start small and you can do things in a contained environment to test them out, I think that is kind of the way to approach it, right? If you try and go really, really big, really, really fast, to me, that's a recipe for disaster. You need to plan this stuff out. You need to pilot it. You need to test it. And you have to have clear metrics coming out of that pilot phase.
Yeah. And what does starting small mean? Is it just is it low-hanging fruit? Is it looking at, tools that are off the shelf? What do you think of when you think of starting small?
Yeah, I mean, I would start looking at the data, see what data you have available and what use cases are interesting to you, where you want to go. And then based off of where you want to end up, looking at what you have, start there and start with just a small use case, build out some pipelines that are repeatable, and then try that first. And if it's successful, sweet, iterate and build upon it, leverage similar tools or maybe diversify a little bit. But if the first go isn't necessarily as successful as you're hoping for it to be, that's where you can make changes and try out different methods or pull in different ideas or different data sets to really help continue on that path. A lot of data science and just AI in general is trial and error and an iterative process. And you need to go into it with that mindset that it'll take more than one try.
And if it really doesn't work the first time, just call it version 1.0.
Yep. The go-to.
Exactly. Ina brings up a really good point, right? It's being able to start with the data. I will tell you, a lot of the conversations that we get into, customers want to do all of these things, and they don't know what data is out there, how they can use the data. That's where I think that's where a data scientist comes in and helps them understand the data that they have and how they can use it to make an impact. I mean, that's the most critical piece, right? In my opinion, in trying to get these use cases out there, is understand what data you have and what data you can get.
Yeah.
I think that's, for me, one of the most frustrating things as a data scientist. When a customer has data, they've spent the money to store the data, they're collected the data, and then they're not doing anything with the data. So frustrating, especially from somebody who, when you start a data science project, the problem is always, we have no data. So when there's data that you're paying for and storing and you're just not getting the value out of it, that makes me want to bang my head against a wall.
Well, I'm interested because we hear so often that maybe the data is just unorganized, not accessible. I've heard my data estate is just a mess and only getting worse. So do we have to back up at that point and help walk them through how to organize and structure that data? Or what are some of the steps that they have to take to get to the point where they can look at it, assess a use case?
Yeah, I mean, a good place to start is to just look at the conglomerate of it and understand what you have and where it all is. And then if you have a general understanding of what you have and what could be accessible, start again with that use case. Make the data for that use case accessible, easy to use, set up those cleaning steps. So going through data preparation and cleaning, where we make sure the data itself is accurate, it's the right type of data we're looking for, that it's relevant, and again, accessible. And if you start with the use case and data for that use case, it's a lot less daunting than trying to clean up your entire data, the state of your data.
Yeah.
I think, Brian, you're starting to see a common theme here, right? In starting with the use case and starting with the data that you have already.
Yeah. Any infrastructure or, considerations to be thinking about for our clients or viewers out there as they think about having a more robust data estate?
So from an infrastructure standpoint, as far as physical infrastructure, if you're talking physical infrastructure, that's always going to play into it. Where, do they have the compute capability, right? Do they have the right networking? Do they have, the storage that can be, considered high performance storage? Because in a lot of cases, as you scale, you're going to need to deploy those types of high performance architectures, right? Do you need to do that right up front off the bat? No. A lot of times our customers are seeing use by just doing this in the cloud up front and then actually scaling on-prem, right? So it all depends on the customer situation. Some of them are going to have infrastructures that are ready and AI ready. Some of them do not, right? So part of that whole evaluation process, when you look at it, we say start with the data and start with that use case. But when you go to scale, you got to make sure the infrastructure can support that. And there's obviously going to be a cost to that as well.
Well, let's assume that an organization has its data in store. Is there a framework of which to go through and analyze that data, understand what the best use cases might be to start getting those small wins and build up momentum?
So you're gonna start out a conversation with the data scientist by saying you assume. Is that going to be the right way to approach this?
I don't know. You tell me.
We don't assume. We do not assume. Assumptions lead to problems down the road where people are very unhappy with me in the later parts of the process. So I would again start out with really, when you ask like, well, what use cases can I do with my data? You want to relate it back to something that can help the business. Just building a chatbot to build a chatbot doesn't help anybody. In fact, you're wasting time, money, and resources on something that won't get used and therefore won't provide value to your business. So looking at the goals of what you're looking to do and the value you're hoping to get out of AI is a great place to start. And then listing those out and then working with a team of either data scientists or other folks that are relatively well versed in what it takes to build out certain solutions can really help narrow down what is the art of the possible. And that's like the favorite conversation I get to have with customers is, tell me about the data you have, tell me about your goals. Okay, what can we do for you and how can we help you get there? And those are the most exciting conversations I have on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
It's interesting, right? In it, because we get into these customer conversations and we look at this and it's like, yes, we're trying to reduce cost or we're trying to mitigate risk. Well, there's about 100 different ways you can do those things, based on, what's happening in your organization. And again, going back to using that data to make sure that you have the data to actually achieve that goal. And if you don't have the data, how can you go get that data? Is it possible that some of that data is even public, right? That's out there that can help you figure out, can I use this public data to help me, right? So, I mean, have you seen that like with customers, like with using kind of their own internal data, but augmenting that with public data or vice versa?
Yes. So there's kind of two sides to that coin. Yes, I've seen customers that are starting out and then they realize we don't have enough data. Big sector is always healthcare, where people want to use patient data, but they don't have access to a bunch of patient data. So that's where a lot of open source data sets will get pulled in. And then the other side of the coin is a customer doesn't have enough data at this point in time. The next step you can do is, okay, there's also an open source data set. Well, let's set up the right processes to collect this data so that within 6 months we have a robust data set and we can start building. Doesn't necessarily mean you need to pause your whole AI journey and wait those 6 months, because you can start iterating with what you have and look at it and set up, again, the pipelines, the tests, the ideas you have. You can experiment, but then do that for 6 months while you collect a larger data set.
Experiment, but don't assume, right?
experiment, but do not assume.
Hey, note taken. I will stop assuming from here on out on all further AI Proving Ground shows. You're talking about data, going out and getting that data. I do want to just quickly ask, because I've heard a lot about synthetic data. Where does that fall in here? Is that a valuable contribution? Is it still, a little bit of an unknown?
Yeah, so synthetic data has its time and its place, and there's different ways that you can generate a synthetic data set. One method can be just removing all forms of PII or obfuscating the data. Another way is to use machine learning to learn the patterns of your data sets and then generate brand new data sets. With that, it is super important, once again, with the whole assumptions piece, to call out that synthetic data was used, and you can use it on training sets, but then you want to validate on real life data and not make any sort of assumption that the synthetic data is 100% similar to what you're using. So it has its time and its place. And it's a very interesting topic and how it gets used. I guess I'm curious, Mike, what your thoughts are on synthetic data.
Looking at it, like you said, there's time and a place for it, right? But the validation of that synthetic data against real actual data is absolutely critical. If you are not, the real part of this, that data, actual data piece, me personally, I want the real data. Do you have a choice sometimes where you have to create that synthetic data? No, you have to create it, but I would make sure that validation piece is top of mind, right? And then we're just gonna pummel Brian with this whole assumption thing, but
yeah, just be the.
But yeah, so that's my view on the synthetic data piece.
Well, we'll cut out that assumption part. Just that's the power of having the production team in my pocket.
Exactly. Create deep fake where you don't say assumption.
Right. Exactly. Well, let's talk about ROI, because that seems like the next logical step, or almost every logical step for a client when they're exploring any AI use case is trying to articulate or define ROI. But it seems like it's been a massive struggle for the industry in general to figure out and wrap its minds around what ROI means in the age of AI. What role does data play in ROI, or perhaps maybe a data scientist, Ina, such as yourself, helping drive towards AI or understand what the actual ROI might be?
Yeah, ROI is a fun question. And it always is, because you can't necessarily, or at least I haven't been able to put an exact number on it. I would almost liken it to, what's the ROI on hiring a new data scientist?
100%.
Mike does not know the ROI of me being hired. I would say I have a huge ROI, but there's no proof of that, unfortunately, or no exact number for that. So the ROI can be seen in process improvements and in freeing up your people to work on more complex tasks. But I have not come up with an equation yet to validate or to specifically spell out the ROI of every AI product out there.
I think we're going to create one. We're going to have a formula that's going to be called the Ina principle. And
yeah.
Then we'll figure out exactly what that ROI is. But there are ways to capture ROI, Brian, right? You look at some of the things that we're doing internally with our coding assistants, what we're doing with the RFP assistant, how we're using Atom. There's definitely a way to track ROI as far as, how much code is actually being generated by artificial intelligence versus a human having to create it. What does that mean in terms of a financial aspect, as far as calculating that against an hourly rate for a developer, right? So there are ways to look at the ROI, and then there's other ways that are let's take something like computer vision, right? I just got off a call a little while ago talking about safety and security and using computer vision. Right? Let's say you're a manufacturing company and you've got an injury that happens in your facility, or God forbid there's a fatality. there's going to be a cost to the organization from a financial standpoint. But some of the things that are really return on investment that's hard to measure is, what about employee morale when a coworker gets injured? What about from a marketing standpoint about being able to go out there and hire people to say, hey, we're a really safe environment, and people get wind of it. It's like, hey, we've had 4 injuries in the last 6 months. Why would I want to go work there? Right. So there's ROI that can be captured, and some of that kind of soft ROI that you look at as far as, what is the brand impact, right? What's the reputation impact on the company itself? Right. So there are a number of different things. I mean, I look at, can I use AI, right, to improve my product? If I use AI to improve my product, that's going to be proven in, okay, it might be more sales, right? More sales that are out there, better net promoter score or something. But if I look at it and say, okay, I'm using AI and using this data to improve the way I make these products, and I'm using technology in my environment, well, guess what? There's an ROI there, because you may be targeting and hiring people that want to come work for you because you're using those technologies, right? Because you're using advanced technologies. So it's kind of all over the place, but there is a way to capture ROI.
I think to add to that too, the ROI really depends on your users and them actually using the tool that you've built. At Worldwide, like you said, we have Adam AI, which is a GPT style model, a chatbot that has access to a lot of our internal resources to help us employees get access to these documents, resources, videos, and a plethora of information without having to go track down Sally in XYZ department, who would usually be the one to give me access to that video or document. So I think the amount of the way your users actually use the tool and having them respond and actually use it in their day-to-day life and having it make their life easier will have a huge impact on that ROI. And if you develop a tool that's not actually usable by either your employees or your users on a day-to-day basis, you won't see what could have been the ROI on that tool. You will see something significantly less if the adoption just isn't there.
Yep. Yeah. And I've only had good experiences with Sally getting the information, so I'm not sure.
I don't know. Sally sometimes likes to ignore my emails, so
a little bit of a slacker, yeah. Well, I think I like that you brought up user adoption there, because if you're going for those small wins, you're getting momentum. Gradually, you're getting users more adopted, and once you reach a certain percentage of workflows flowing through AI, you're probably starting to get to a horizon of realizing that value. But I guess it gets back to our initial kind of conundrum of people need to move fast, but they also are trying to express what that ROI is. When does ROI start to materialize, or if you're having to make an investment ahead of time, that seems like it's a gap that's still not accounted for, Mike? Or is that off base, or is that accurate?
Well, the interesting thing is, over your left shoulder, you've got this AI proving ground sign up there, which allows customers to not have to make that investment up front, and they can use the infrastructure that we've built to test those things out. So right there, it kind of lends towards, hey, here's an improved ROI, if you will, right? But if I look at this, and again, we talk about that starting small and setting metrics and getting the metrics that you want to see out of these proofs of concept, these pilots, track those metrics and be meticulous about tracking those metrics. And then once you look at that, you figure out how to scale it out. And once you scale it out, that's when you're going to see that improved ROI.
Yeah. You know what? Let's go back to data here. We mentioned the AI proving ground here. And how would a client think about data? Are you, as a data scientist, or any one of our data scientists, are we collaborating with different parts of the business to understand what KPIs we're looking at, or what metrics we're looking at? I guess maybe walk me through the relationship a little bit about data scientists and advancing an AI use case.
Yeah. So data scientists, we got KPIs, key performance indicators that we look at with each model. you'll see a plethora of metrics that really matter to us and other people just look at as a percentage, and they don't really care as long as the model is working the way it's supposed to. So what it really comes down to is what the users care about, rather than the numbers that I care about, are the accuracy and the relevance of the responses. So the data itself needs to lend itself towards that. So when you start off as scientists, when you're looking at one of these problems, you want to make sure there is enough relevant data that we've curated for that specific use case. We put our time and energy in there. So probably 90% of most data science projects are within the data. These days we use a lot of pre-built model frameworks. So training the model itself has become a lot more hardware reliant than necessarily building a model from scratch. For example, like building out a neural network completely from scratch and tuning it, but rather using something that you can just send data into. So a lot of time and effort being put into that data is very important. And you'll notice that if you don't, you have to go back and rework, and it will make the project take longer.
Yeah. One of the interesting things, and you tell me if you see this, in the past, like you look at what a data scientist was, and you just get this picture of somebody who's just coding away and trying to figure out all these different data patterns. But now, like, one of the reasons, that you were such a key hire on the team is, we're able to put people in front of our customers that can have conversations and talk about the business impact. Not just about the data, but now you're having a conversation about how the data impacts the business. So across different verticals, across different use cases. To me, I think there's an evolution happening of data scientists where there's no more stereotype of data scientists just plugging away on the data, but really being more involved in the business decisions and impacting the overall business.
Yeah, it needs to be. And the whole concept of technical people being super into AI and then everyday consumers maybe not using it as much really comes down to that, because data scientists traditionally have been so numbers, models, math focused, and less effort goes into the front end and talking to lines of business and or your everyday person who would use these applications. So when data scientists are taking that deep breath and going out into the big world and actually talking to people about our ideas and the impact that these ideas can have and how they can help people, not only in their companies and their work, but also in their day-to-day lives, it makes the adoption of AI less daunting, because you can use something as simple as a little chatbot to help you out, and it's not a massive endeavor.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, I think that the data science world is evolving before our eyes, right? That DNA of a data scientist is changing.
Yes.
And, I credit a lot of that to obviously people in our industry, but even in schools and degree programs, they're starting to talk more about not just the data part of it, but about the interaction between the data scientists and the different lines of business and different personas.
Yeah, I was forced into a public speaking class. So as part of my initial degree, that was great. Bunch of very quiet people in a room having to talk in front of each other. It was a sight to see. Well,
there you go. Yeah. Evolution.
Well, I mean, it sounds like it may, a little bit maybe outside your comfort zone, at least at the time. I'm curious, how else do you see the role or the job description of a data scientist evolving over the course of the next 6, 12, 18 months, knowing that there's so much in flux with AI?
Yeah, I think as a data scientist, you need to be a jack of all trades. When people hear data scientist, they think of everything, the job description being everything from your very basic data analytics to building a large language model from scratch and creating the next largest model out there that's integrated within all of our workflows. So you kind of need to be able to hit everything from traditional statistics to machine learning to these generative style models. Oh, and then you also need to be able to explain this complex math and all these architectures and how everything's built to somebody that not only does not care how it works on the back end, they just want it to work, but also might not have the understanding of why it really matters that this one feature is this rather than that. So the explainability piece of it. Explainability has always been important in AI and people wanting to understand why models are giving the responses they are, but being able to explain what's inside our heads to people that aren't data scientists is so necessary. And I think you'll see those scientists that are stepping out of their comfort zones to learn how to talk to large groups of people and be able to distill these complex ideas into everyday speak. They'll be the ones that are the most successful at people's companies.
Well, Ina, treat me as one of those stubborn business types that would say, I don't need to know how it works or why, what's going on behind the scenes. I just want it to work. Certainly I've been in that situation before, but is the idea that the more I know about how it works, like the more I can prompt it or use it because I'll understand what it's capable of, or what would your answer be?
Yeah, I really try to equate things to daily life when I explain to lines of business, or explain it in terms of their daily life rather than mine. If understanding how their business works on a day-to-day basis and understanding when I talk to customers and listening for their pain points is huge, because then when it comes to explaining how this model or how this solution will apply to them, really pointing out, I understand and I hear your pain points, and this super cool model and solution I've been working on and that I know will help you will help because it will address your specific pain points and not just be another blanket solution. So I guess that's another thing to add on to what a data scientist should be able to do. You need to be able to listen and understand what the problem you're actually solving for is. Again, don't assume.
Yeah, that's a key skill, right? From a data scientist standpoint, is being able to, you're looking at the data, but being able to listen and understand some of the challenges that you're having. Otherwise, you can't map the data to the challenge, right? You've got to be able to listen really well.
Yeah, so that's the what's on the horizon for data scientists. Mike, what about flip the side here? What's the future of how businesses will interact, engage, or work with their data?
Well, look at it this way. We used the example earlier from safety and security in manufacturing. Imagine being able to go into an industrial system, be able to go into a manufacturing plant, and be able to talk in natural language to the machine. Ask, hey, what's wrong with you today? What are the issues that you see happening? And being able to have these kind of predictive systems in there that can say, yeah, you know what, this part of the machine, we're not working so well. And then being able to go and ask, hey, okay, well, how do I fix you? Right? And be able to use all of that data that might be, in troubleshooting manuals. It could be from people who have done it before, from trouble ticketing systems, whatever the case is, but being able to actually have a natural language conversation with a machine to understand how it's doing, right? That is kind of one of the things where I see people interacting with the data a little bit differently. And it's not necessarily interacting with the data, but it's having a system to interact with the data, right? Being able to use something like Adam to go in and ask questions and basically talk in real terms, real language about what's going on. Instead of going into a command line and saying, config T this and going through all the different, command interfaces, what if I just said, hey, what's wrong with you today? Are you doing okay? And have this machine be able to come back, whether it's a router, a switch, an industrial machine, a PLC, a camera, whatever, be able to come back and tell me, yeah, I'm doing fine, or no, I think there's a problem.
Right? We're already on that scale, but and it feels like, I'm sorry to interrupt there, but it sounds, sum up your answer, like treating a machine and AI just more like a human, asking it, how are you feeling today? And it understanding what you need back.
Yeah, well, asking human-like questions. I don't think I'd ever treat a machine like a human. I try and beat that into my daughter's head constantly. Remember, it's not a person. It's a machine. You don't have to say please and thank you to the machine until there are overlords and they demand it. Thank you. But that's the other part of it. So yeah, it's being able to communicate the way we want to communicate and the way we're used to communicating, right? Not being forced to communicate in code that's specific to a machine or specific to a machine language.
Yeah, again, slotting into like helping your day-to-day life, not changing your day-to-day life.
From a data perspective, is that something that you see organizations ready for, that type of future that Mike is describing? I know it's not that far off. Or is the data always ready? It just has to be structured in such a way that it'll come out.
The data always needs to be cleaned. The data will always need a little bit of help. And having enough data is definitely something as well. But in terms of the responses and how these models ingest the questions, we're there in how the models understand the questions. And then if you want it to respond to you like a more human-esque, or a way that a human could digest rather simply, we're there, because that is not so much buried in the data, but rather in how we decide to structure the prompts and how we ask the models to respond.
Yeah. Before we wrap up here, any questions that, based on the conversation we've had so far, that you would ask each other? Whether it be diving a little bit more into the future or diving into the mindset of a data scientist, what would you be asking each other, and use it as a proxy for like what should organizations be asking themselves?
Yeah, I've got a great question. Is when should, you're a data scientist, when should somebody engage you, right? At what point in their AI journey? Is it at the very beginning? Is it midway? When should you be involved as a data scientist, and where do you basically are going to provide the most value?
Yeah, I mean, if you need help coming up with use cases, pull me in right away. If you have use cases and you want to understand if they're possible, that would be a good time to pull me in. Anytime when we're trying to understand where we want to end up and what we have to start with is a great time to pull in a scientist. We will go through and ask all those questions and do our due diligence, even if you pull us in later, because once again, we do not assume. We go back and double check. But honestly, scientists are going to be of most value pretty early on, so that we can help you understand what you actually want, what you have, and what you need to get there, to make it a repeatable process, so you're not starting from scratch every single time that you're wanting to create an AI solution.
Yep, that's a great answer. And I would see the same thing as, for me, being able to bring a data scientist in and bring them early into the conversation. It's why, Brian, it's why we're making the investments from a WWT standpoint, and why we made investments 10 years ago in bringing those types of data scientists on board, and why we continue to grow that part of the business.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll cut it right there, because I know that we're coming up on time here. Thank you to the both of you for joining me today. It was a great conversation. I apologize that I assumed. I will not do that again. I can promise you. And I look forward to having you guys on again in the future.
You got it. Thank you, Brian. Thanks, Enid.
Well, as you now know, the role of the data scientist is evolving from purely technical, behind-the-scenes role to one that requires strong communication and business acumen. I want to thank our guests, Mike and Ina, for taking time out of their busy schedules for joining me today. A few lessons I'm walking away with. Start small and focus on high-impact use cases. It's easy to flirt with large-scale AI projects right away, but focusing on use cases that provide the most immediate business value and then iterating from there is helpful. Understand and leverage your data. Understanding what data you have available, how it can be used, and potentially augmenting it with external data sources to enhance the value you can derive and make a world of difference. And the art of data science is changing in real time. Data scientists need to be able to explain complex concepts to non-technical stakeholders and align AI and machine learning solutions with the organization's strategic goals. If you like this episode of the AI Proving Ground podcast, please consider leaving a review or rating us, and sharing with friends and colleagues is always appreciated. This episode of the AI Proving Ground podcast was co-produced by Naz Baker, Stephanie Hammond, and Mallory Shaffran. Our audio and video engineer is John Knobloch, and my name is Brian Felt. We'll see you next time.